morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're listening or watching from in the world. Of course, welcome back to the U-Turn Up Show here on Gbkm FM. Of course, I'm your host, Romain Redman, and don't forget, this is where we aim to inform, empower, and also energize today's youth. If you're joining us and you were here with us last week, of course, welcome back to the show. If you're just joining us for the very first time, of course, welcome to the U-Turn Up Show. Don't forget, our platforms are on Facebook at Gbkm Tv, on YouTube at Gbkm TV. Also get us on our website, www.gbkm.fm. You can also get us on a TuneIn app. It's Gbkm, and you can also download our app from our website, and of course take us with you wherever you go in the world. That's right, but of course the U-Turn Up Show is brought to you by the kind sponsorship of AOF Immigration Canada, who specialize in all your immigration needs, ranging from the Quebec University Program, permanent residency, student visa, whatever your immigration needs may be, they have you covered. So of course, contact AOF Immigration for your confidential and private consultation. Their phone number is 416-629-4617. You can also send them an email at info@aofimmigration.com. You can also visit their offices. That's, of course, if you're in Ontario. They're located at 5800 Ambler Drive in Mississauga, Ontario. So, of course, last week on the show, we discussed the state of Ontario's education system. I was kind enough to be joined by a member of Parliament, provincial Parliament, that is, Ms. Merit Stiles, who is also the education critic with the official opposition, and so many information was unpacked in that interview as to how to make the system more equitable, as she said, going forward. But this week, of course, we take a different path as we discuss the issue addressing anti-black racism in our society. I know for a fact that we've all been tuned in to the television, to social media, and we've seen what has been unraveling in our society. So today, we're going to get those tangible tips, those tangible tools as to how to make things like these don't reoccur in the future, as also how to make them better while we aim for that equitable and that perfect world which so many of our forefathers have told us about, have dreamt about in their prophecies. But of course, we'll take a very first break here on the U-Turn Up Show, but we'll be right back with so much more right after these messages. We'll soon be back.
As the world fights this coronavirus, we are standing together as a family.
My name is Kevin. I'm a fan of Gbkm.
My name is Pastor Clement Omozane.
I'm Medea, your red carpet host.
I am your host, Ellen Roxon, for the show Talk That Talk here on Gbkm FM.
I'm a mother and a teacher. I stand with everyone at this time.
And my name is OJ Egogo, co-host of the King's Domain.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Gawardi, the host of the Chat Up Show on Gbkm.
My name is Kenny Bazwai, President and CEO, Gbkm FM and TV. We stand with all the community affected by this pandemic.
As the world.
Absolutely, and welcome back to the U-Turn Up Show right here on Gbkm FM. Of course, I'm your host, Romain Redman, and you're locked into the hour from 3 p.m. until 4 p.m. And as you've seen going across on the screen down below, today's topic, one which is ever so relevant for discussion in our society, and it doesn't seem to stop going forward, having those discussions, having those pertinent and constructive discussions. It's addressing anti-black racism in our society. We spoke about it on last week's show in relation to our education system. This week we take it to a bigger scale. And of course, in studios with me this week to help break down that conversation is, of course, our PhD candidate and the coordinator for the Center of Integrative Anti-Racism Studies at the Ontario Institute of Studies in Education, Miss Janelle Brady. But of course, Miss Brady, thank you so much for joining me on the show here today.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really, really happy to be here today with you, Romain. I really appreciate all the work that you're doing at GBKFM and for taking time to invite me on the show. Thank you.
Absolutely, it's our pleasure. You know, as a media outlet which serves the grassroots black community, we can't bypass issues like these that affect us, but of course we can't bypass those pertinent and relevant discussion as to how to make our communities better and stronger going forward, right? I know for a fact in your studies, we're just discussing going forward your work in the education system, black parenting, and all those amazing stuff. But today we're going to stretch a net a little wider today and try to encapsulate especially our community of black men, black women, younger generation, older generation into this discussion. But before we venture into today's discussion though, I want to just share with us the work that you've been doing at the Center for Integrative Anti-Black Racism Studies.
Yes, thank you. So I've had the pleasure of working as a coordinator in a volunteer capacity and sometimes as a student researcher for the past 4 years, really.
Yes.
And the director is Dr. George Day, who is very renowned. He is a leading scholar in anti-racism studies, African indigenous knowledge, and race studies overall.
Yes.
So I'm very, very fortunate and blessed to work under his directorship. And some of the work that we've looked at is how do we address anti-racism. But this center has been around since 1996, and the approach that they take, that we take as a collective, because it's really a group of a ton of volunteers,
Yes.
is we look at anti-racism, but from an integrative perspective. So when we say that, we mean, what do we mean, right?
Yes.
We mean, how does race connect to gender? How does race connect to disability? How does it connect to place of birth, nationality, religion, language, sexuality, sexual orientation? How do all of these things intersect? And how do they make people have unique lived experiences, right?
Yes.
So one of the notable things that Sears has been able to do is to organize the Decolonizing Conference. And this is going back to the late 90s.
Yes.
And I worked with a wonderful a colleague, I was going to say counterpart, but a colleague, Ezi Odozor. And Ezi keeps me in check, she keeps me in line, and she's a wonderful black woman who's done tons of work behind the scenes. So I'd just like to take a moment to acknowledge her work in recreating and reimagining better education for our black children and black youth. And what that might look like from a decolonizing perspective. Like how can we really move forward based on the work that our elders have done to just carry that through, right? So the last decolonizing...
So the decolonizing angle that you look at this from, break that part down for us in your explanation, please.
Yeah, so that's a very important part because it really relates back to the project of colonization. And the project of colonization has really had an effect on Black people, Latinx people, Indigenous people. It's really ruptured our lives for generations. So in order to move forward, a lot of scholars have taken and activists have taken the approach that we need a decolonial approach. We need to decolonize these systems because although we no longer have colonial flags waving and hanging, the pieces are still there within the institutions and also within people, right? So that's really that mindset and also that change to institutions that we need to have. Yeah.
Absolutely. But the term anti-black racism, the phrase, the term, it's a power-packed and a multifaceted phrase, which one can easily be swayed in a direction which doesn't encapsulate the full magnitude to which this phrase extends. So I want you to give us sort of like that comprehensive understanding of what it means, anti-black racism, how the facets that are associated with anti-black racism, and how it manifests itself in our society.
Yeah, so in order to think about anti-Black racism, because it's not anything that's new, right? The term is not very new. Dr. Benjamin brought forth the term in 2003,
Yes.
but Black mothers and community activists have brought up this term going way back to the 60s, right, as
Yes.
well. So now it's coming more and more into the mainstream, but I'm really glad you raised that question.
Yes.
Because in order to think about anti-Blackness, I turn to some of the work of Dr. George Day, Nana Day, where he says we need to think of Blackness as a political tool, right? So some folks who are old enough would know about how people who would be considered brown, quote unquote, in Canada called themselves Black in the UK. And why did they do that? They did that because they were standing in solidarity and full support. They weren't saying, I'm not Black, I'm brown, I'm different, right?
Yes.
They're saying, we need to connect our struggle and your struggle, and we need to take up Blackness as a political tool. So even for Black people, some folks would say, well, I'm not Black, right? Or if you're Caribbean, you know, me coming from Caribbean background, Jamaican Trini, some folks would say, I'm not
I'm not
African.
African.
Right?
And African is the hallmark for Blackness. And
Exactly.
especially in terms of like colorism, it's that scale of moving from African to being mixed, right?
Exactly, exactly. And that's part and parcel to the project of colonization, right? It's not only the ravaging of the land, slavery, removing people from Africa, bringing them to the Americas, to the islands, and to the U.S., doing all of these horrible atrocities. But it's also the impact that it's had on our communities as Black people. We really need to talk about that too.
Yes.
The ways that anti-Black racism manifests. And so going back to Nana Day, he would say that, you know, rather than Africans saying I'm not Black, Caribbean saying I'm not African, we need to just rethink Blackness and just use it as a tool, and not shy away from race, not shy away from conversations of Blackness, and just really take that up as a community, as a collective, as we have done in the past, as we continue to do, push forward in that struggle.
So
you
you
asked
made
about how
mention of an important facet of our conversation today, collectivization in terms of Black people, as you said, whether you're African, whether you're Caribbean, whether you are a Black Canadian, really coming together and knowing the power of that unity. And I think that's often the criticism that the community also gets in terms of we're one of the most disunited or ununited race that exists, because we're always matched, especially in the Canadian context, against other races, whites or let's say our South Asian counterparts who have much more closely knitted family units, which many persons have said is missing from the Black community.
Yeah, so I want to pick up on that point. So, you know, sometimes we look at the other community and we say, they're all together over there, right?
Yes.
But I also think that's another way
Yeah.
that it kind of blocks our community from having the conversations that we're already having, right? Or highlighting the work that's already being done. So I actually take a different position, because South Asian communities are not all together.
No.
Chinese communities are definitely not all together. If you see what's going on in Hong Kong, if you see what's going on in India with so-called Prime Minister Modi, sorry to say, if you see what's going on in China, if you see what's going on even in Toronto, there's still those hierarchies that take place within communities.
Yes.
So I don't want us to feel so down on ourselves and so hard on ourselves that we're not doing enough as a community to address a problem that's actually systemic, right?
Okay.
Because time and time again, Black groups like the Black Action Defense Committee, Black Lives Matter more recently, have come together, have mobilized, and they've mobilized for systems which are broken. And these are systems that work for other people, right? So we carry the load of going to work, going to school, getting good grades, doing all of these things. but yet we also have to carry the work of dealing with racism, anti-Black racism, waking up and seeing these horrible things in the news, right?
Yes.
So I wouldn't quite say that, certain communities have it together.
Yes.
Some communities that are more tight-knit, they've gone through like a recent struggle, like a recent genocide or those things, like the Tamil community, right?
Yes.
So that's more in recent history. So it's different than the Black community, I would say, which is much broader and people are coming from all over the place and this and that, right?
Yes.
So I would just want us to acknowledge and clarify that,
Yes.
because I was saying in a meeting last night, I've presented at numerous academic conferences, and the first one to get up and tell me about the Black community needs to pull up and they need to do this work and they need to come together is usually a white body, right?
Yes.
So why do they flip that on us? When really, if you look at the history of the Ontario Parents Committee, the Black Parents Committee, they've been doing this work for years and years and years, right?
Yes.
So where does it stop? Where does the anti-Black racism kind of end? And I'm glad we're having that conversation today.
So it's not a matter of us not pulling together and working, but it's that our efforts are not being recognized. Is that what you're saying?
We could do better.
Yes.
We can always do better, but I also don't want to dismiss the work that's been done. Definitely, the efforts are not recognized, right? And it's on the ground, it's grassroots work, and sometimes you just have a group or a network of mothers who call each other, who go into the school, like one who could speak really well might be the one that goes in and advocates for other students. That's the role that my mom used to take.
Yes.
There was no name, there was no organization. It was just informally, right?
Just go in as a concerned parents, as concerned citizens.
Exactly. So this is the ways that Black parents advocate for each other. And also, Black parents also work often in community in terms of after school, I would go to my aunt's house, I would go to this one's house, I would go to that one's house while my mom was working, right?
Yes.
So these are some of the ways that we're still carrying on those African traditional ways of parenting. But at the same time, that parenting is not always respected or regarded within white institutions or white systems. It's seen as quote unquote bad parenting, but it's a community approach, right?
Yes.
And if the schools don't understand where we're coming from, they're going to constantly antagonize our children and our youth, right?
In that
the
regard.
education system, yeah.
So the great part about that is a great lead into the reason why we are really here. Today we're here to discuss the issue of addressing this anti-Black racism, and much of these discussions have resurfaced, especially in what we've seen happening this week, especially in the U.S., in which, of course, Mr. Floyd died at the hands of four police officers, one of which has now officially charges have been filed against him, and the other three has been fired, for lack of a better word, the right word. But in the context of that, though, we've seen protests and looting and riots emerging across the U.S. And I think that's where most of the conflict lies right now. Because if we go back and is oftentimes quoted before and is still being quoted even in this right, Dr. Martin Luther King. Dr. Martin Luther King inspired a generation before us to rise up to speak against injustices like these, police brutality and all that stuff. But he also spoke against rioting and the sense of violence overshadowing the mission that we're going toward. What we're seeing now in the U.S., was this an inevitable point for us to move towards? Or is it that we can still come back from and keep on that trajectory of peaceful protest and really doing lawful stuff and work in the system, as they say, to bring about the change that we need.
Right. So you raise a really important conversation and point, right? So even the term riots, right?
Yes.
Some of the terms, some of the phrases that are used
Yes.
by mainstream media kind of deflect from the organizing that Black people are doing and Black communities are doing, right? And that the response only becomes about the so-called riots. I personally do not even say that. It's a protest.
Yes. Okay.
They were trying to protest in a peaceful manner, and that didn't work. You know, tear gas was thrown at them and all sorts of things.
Yes.
So we try, right? We try as Black people, we try as Black community. And I would have been down at Christmas Fits, so I want to shout out all of the organizers for organizing Not Another Black Life right now. But I thought it was important to have this conversation with you today on GBKM.
Thank you.
No problem.
But of course, police
I would say-
brutality is at the center of that discussion. Police brutality has been, oh gosh, for the past at least 10 years, 20 years, 25 years, 30 years, come to think of it. Police brutality, we've been hearing that term. It has been defined and redefined. But what is police brutality? What is the extent of force police can use on a suspect? Because in all due fairness, they were responding to a criminal activity been taking place, but what was the extent that the police should have gone to in terms of apprehending Mr. Floyd for one, and ensuring that the legal system, the law, brought him to justice instead of him dying in the middle of the streets?
Right. So the thing is, if you're called to a situation to intervene, there's no reason why a life needs to be taken, right? With Mr. Floyd's case, that was just totally brutal, totally intentional, and just cruel. In the case of the issues that come up here in Canada,
Yes.
people are calling the police themselves as family members.
Yes.
And, you know, they're calling for help. So if you call an officer for help and then your child ends up dead, where's the trust in the system, right? So I'm not against what folks in Minneapolis are doing to express themselves, because now we're having a conversation, right? Because people have tried for years, and people have been looted, you know, and lots of people are saying this. Black people have been looted. We were taken from, you know, our history doesn't start at colonization. We were taken from Africa. We were brought to the Americas. We were brutalized before brutality was even a term. And even the system of policing, you know, the way it's a flawed system. We need change. I would turn more to Malcolm X or aspects of Martin Luther King, which aren't usually taken by the mainstream or taught in schools, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely, but so let me just play the other side of the argument here, because we want a well-rounded discussion. Let me play the other side. So one, they're saying that, and even the President of the United States, and then we'll come back to the Canadian context. One, the President described it as looting. The mayor of Atlanta, Mrs. Bottoms, of course, downed, for one, what is happening. You mean stealing from stores, damaging properties for businesses. And remember, in Atlanta, businesses, as she said, is about 50% is black owned. And a lot of these places that are being destroyed are black owned businesses. So when we look at it from that standpoint, then, how is destroying probably your fellow blacks gonna inspire change?
So I would just say all of this outrage
Yes.
about the looting, or whatever you want to call it, is one aspect, right?
Yeah.
It's one aspect that's been blown up too. I think if we were to address anti-Black racism, the conversation would be on the lives that were lost. And the outrage that you see from certain people in terms of how could they do that.
Yes.
Those very same people weren't saying, how could they do that when the police officer had his knee, basically in George Floyd's neck,
Yeah.
or when Breonna Taylor was shot in her home. So that type of outrage, if folks were to channel that instead
Yeah.
to the lives that were lost, we
Yeah.
probably would have a different conversation. And if the mayor has the responsibility to the people too, right? If
Yes.
the mayor was to channel that outrage towards what's happening every day to Black children, maybe it wouldn't have gotten to this point, right? If we live every day outraged
Yes.
and upset, then we can definitely make change. And the anger that we feel can be channeled to make change. We're having the conversations now, right?
Absolutely, and you mentioned a very important aspect of this too, the need for effective leadership in times like these. Just last year during the election, our own Prime Minister came under huge amount of scrutiny for him, the so-called blackface issue, and how that ties into the same systems of race, anti-Black racism that has been perpetuating itself, especially in the North American context. And we're going to speak to the North American context here today. And him trying to lead a nation which has a massive and increasing amount of Black minorities and Black populace. But I think what is happening there is that people are saying, if we don't get leadership that is responsive to issues like anti-Black racism, then everything is just going to go bad and stay the way that they are.
Right, right. So the leadership piece is very key. On the Prime Minister, I do not condone what was done. I know a lot of us in the Black community just rolled it off and said, oh, it was just a costume or that sort of thing. But it really goes to show the ways that anti-Black racism manifests. It's not always just in policing. It's not always just in those horrendous videos. I feel so sorry for the poor baby. This young girl who took the video, right?
Yeah.
17-year-old. My heart goes out to her. So it's not only those moments though, right? It's also the types of jokes that people make that they feel okay with. It's also who they think is, an expert on certain issues and not. It's also who gets hired. There's so many ways that it manifests.
Yes.
But there's no single solution, right? And this is something we got at in the education context on the panel just on Tuesday, is that there's no simple cookbook or recipe or
No
tool.
magic formula.
No, not at all. Or else it would have been solved already, right?
Absolutely.
But I would say there are some things we could do to support different causes, and I'm glad you had MP Marit Stiles on last week, because I also think fully funded, good, strong education systems, public systems, not private, can really help our communities. And the erosion of those systems has also led to, really detrimental effects for Black, Indigenous, and racialized students and children.
Absolutely. And one of the emergent pieces about especially what's unfolding in the media right now and what's unfolding in societies is call for greater levels of allyship from our fellow white and brown, if you're in the Canadian context, allyship from our fellow white and brown counterparts. to really join in this effort because, as I said, it's when all of us, grow that the entire country will grow and get better, right? So who gets a pass nowadays? What is it? Okay, so there are two levels. There are this overt racist comments or racist actions, and there are some covert ones. Now, what gets a pass? Do we still give pass to the grandma who makes the subtle racist joke and blames it on, I was brought up in an old-fashioned system where that was okay? Does grandma still get the pass? Does your white friend still gets to make the mock, as they call it, her black friends, putting on the hair pattern, the hand clapping and all that stuff? Do we still allow that going forward?
So I'm so happy you brought this up because there are some small acts that people can do, and it's not just on the Black community to resolve anti-Black racism. So some people are done with the term allies. They're like, I'm fed up. It's been years, it's been decades, especially those activists who've been doing it for so long. But at the same time, I think there is an important responsibility from white people and from racialized people to stand for issues of anti-Black racism, to stand up against it, better yet, not for it.
Stand against it. Yeah.
Because the same people who are within our community and doing the little, teach me how to whine, teach me this new move. Oh, you see the Beanie Boojoo, you see the Clash the other day. These same white people, we need these white people who are in our community to be vocal and louder than us. We need them to not be silent in these times, right? Absolutely. And there are some people who are kind of stepping up, and this happened during the civil rights movement, and we need this to happen all across North America, not only for those who are friendly and who know the Black community. That's something that really rubs me the wrong way. It's like, you eat the food, you know how to cook the active saltfish, you know how to do all of these things, but when another Black boy is killed, you're quiet. Why, right? And you turn and talk about the looting. So we need our white allies, or some people say critical friends, to really take up anti-Black racism, just like Blackness is linked to Indigenous issues as well in Canada, right? We need to familiarize ourselves with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the 94 calls to action, and how this land in Canada was stolen. And we need to not only treat Indigenous people like their issues are of the past, or they're no longer here, or reserve, but it's also urban Indigenous issues that we need to also stand up for and stand in solidarity of, because all of these issues are they're connected and they're linked, right? So as this is happening in Manitoba, 3 Indigenous people were shot by police as well. Someone as young as 16 years old. Right? So I'm covering something on that will come out soon. But we need to not be divided, and you were speaking about that, about within the Black community, but even more broadly, we need to be fully standing in solidarity. So the covert remark that you mentioned, like the grandma saying something, as white people, we should call that out in that moment and deal with that. And white friends say something, you should call that out in the moment and deal with that. You shouldn't leave it to the Black person to do that. Yeah, and it happens in the staff room for teachers all the time, right? And if someone thinks that, I have friends who are white passing, but they're not white, right? They could be Latinx, or they could be from different places. And some people might feel comfortable with them until they know who they are, and they might have some little subtle remarks. But these little subtle remarks also play out to how that teacher would treat Black boys in the classroom, Black girls in the classroom, how they would punish them, how they would not pay attention to them, how they would think that their homes and their families and their ways of doing things are completely backwards or wrong, right?
Yeah.
So we need to really address all levels. And just, I just want to reiterate that it can't only be on the shoulders of Black people, right?
It has to should be shared. Well, and an interesting thing about that too, that conversation, I said a couple weeks ago too, the interesting part about, and especially why I think a person shouldn't be given that pass to make the jokes and then blame it on being old-fashioned, is because there's no one living outside of. There's no one living right now that was born when slavery was still legal. Everyone who is living on the face of the earth today know what that conversation is like. Everyone who is living right now knows what that anti-black racism means. They know it. They know what is accepted and what is not accepted. So when they say, the mere fact that they can, go back to saying, oh, this is how I was brought up, means that you know, for one, that you're saying something wrong or you're doing something wrong, but you're trying to seek refuge in the fact that, okay, I'm old and I'm old-fashioned, so I should be allowed to do it. And in truth and in fact, that's not the case.
Yeah. And if we carry through with that line of thought, like, women were not considered persons, right?
Yes.
And we're not able to vote, and we're not able to do all of those things. And white women were afforded that right in the 1920s in Canada, but Black, Indigenous, racialized women, not until much later, right? So if we just say, oh, well, this is a thing of the past, I was raised in an old school way, then you don't have a right to work, you don't have a right to go to school, your children, your grandchildren, granddaughters don't have a right to go to school, they should not vote. So if you're going to go old school, then it's
follow
just
it
like
to the T, right? Follow it to the T.
Mm-hmm, yeah. So also silence is another thing.
Yes.
Silence is a big, right?
Yeah.
So when do you make jokes and when do you not stand up, right? Like, a lot of Black people are very tired. Last week maybe we were getting into making recipes at home, but this week, like, people are exhausted.
Angry. People
and angry.
We're
Yeah.
tired. For
Yes.
one, it has been for all our existence since 1400s, 1600s, coming down. And what I think people are saying is that we're tired, we want some rest, because as soon as we can see the light, it gets dark again. But of course, on that note, we'll take a very second break here on the U-Turn Up Show. So much being unpacked here. And when we come back, we'll really get into those solutions, because of course, this is a show where we bring you solutions to problems, not just the conversation. And we invite you to join the conversation with your thoughts, with your solutions, and just anything that comes to mind. Of course, our platforms: Facebook, Gbkm TV, on YouTube, Gbkm TV, on our website, www.gbkm.fm, and also get our app from our website. We'll be right back after these messages.
As the world fights this coronavirus, we are standing together as a family.
My name is Kevin. I'm a fan of Gbkm.
My name is Gbkm Tv.
I'm Medea, your red carpet host.
I am your host, Ellen Roxon, for the show Talk That Talk here on Gbkm FM.
I'm a mother and a teacher. I stand with everyone at this time.
Hi, my name is Gbkm, co-host of the King's Domain.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Goody, the host of the Chat-Up Show on GBKM.
My name is Kenny Bazwai, President and CEO, Gbkm FM and TV. We stand with all the community affected by this pandemic.
And of course, welcome back to the U-Turn Up Show right here on Gbkm FM. Of course, we have been having a phenomenal discussion about really addressing anti-Black racism in our society. Of course, I'm being joined by Miss Janelle Brady, of course, PhD candidate and coordinator at the Center for Integrative Anti-Racism Studies at the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education. But Ms. Brady, right before we went for the break, we had that great discussion about what anti-Black racism entails, how it manifests itself in society. Right now, let's get into the solutions, because that's what people want to hear. People want to hear, how do we solve it? How do we ensure that next year, being optimistic, being very optimistic here, the next 10 years, next 20 years, or grandchildren or great-grandchildren can inherit an earth, a society where we live just as equitable and as equal and peaceful as any other person who inhabits the earth.
So I'm glad you raised that, because there are some solutions that folks have been working on. So what we could do is support some of these people in the solutions that they're coming up with, such as scholar and activist Natasha Henry is really looking at Black history and Black Canadian history, because part of the problem is our education system, and it comes back to education, education, education. What are people learning in schools, right? And how can we change that? So folks like Natasha Henry, the Ontario Black History Society, Afia Cooper have worked on changing the curriculum so it has more to do with our Black leaders and our Black Canadian history. So students and children, not only in schools that have more Black children, but all can learn about that. The other piece is we need to have some conversations. This came up, a mentor of mine, Professor Njoki Wan, spoke about this the other day. We need to have some conversations around healing, because a lot of us are carrying a lot of trauma, right?
Yes.
What's happening now, as we've said today, is it's not new. So how do we talk about healing as a community, right? Like, what types of supports do we need to make that happen? And the third point is race-based data. So a mentor of mine, Dr. Carl James at York University, where I did my master's research, was my supervisor. And a lot of folks who know Dr. James, Dr. Carl James, for his work in looking at the data. What is the data? Because Professor McCready also says this, we cannot get to the root of the problem if we don't even know how to quantify it, what's out there, what the problem is, or who is affected by these problems, right? So we've seen this with COVID-19 in Black communities, where our communities are impacted in areas that have more Black community, such as where I live in the downtown Finnish community. You would find there's higher levels of COVID-19. And it's not just to say Black people are more susceptible to it, but some of the pieces around socioeconomic status, housing, healthcare, all intersect and all have an impact on our community. So we need to collect race-based data, not stigmatize our community, because if it's collected in a way where it's very, very racist, it won't have good outcomes, right? But if we collect the data and we know how many Black children are being pushed out of the school system, or how many Black people are being affected by issues around poverty or not being able to access jobs or that sort of thing, then we can say, this is the problem and this is how we go about solving it. But Canada is this kind of multicultural haven where everything is all good. But many of us know that, our grandparents moved here, or our parents moved here, we moved here. And these are hard-working people who struggled, who pushed for, number one,
Yes.
Despite what the institutions would say, they've pushed for our education, right? And they
Yes.
wanted better for us. And some of us who are talking about anti-racism,
Yes.
this is not what we pictured for ourselves, right? We
Yes.
didn't picture our work looking at race. This shouldn't even be a problem still. We'd love to do something else, something different.
Absolutely, but in that regard, and I'm just going to interject here with a study which was done, of course, and submitted by Mr. Martin Turcott. It's entitled "The Results from the 2016 Survey: Education and Labor Market Integration of Black Youth." And I must say, you've had the opportunity to take a look at the survey yourself, and or the results of the findings, and it purported some startling findings. For one, it is saying that educated parents, and that's just one of the many shocking stuff that has emerged from this survey, is that educated parents, or young black youth with educated parents, seem to feel less favorable than black youth with lesser educated parents, or let's not put it, let's say lesser educated parents, but parents who doesn't necessarily have that high level of education in the form of a diploma, a degree, or something to that extent. But so what's happening there? Because we've often heard the conversation that through education, and that's one of my motto, we can really build a nation. But if the survey is correct in what is purporting, that education in their parents is not transferring to the students, then what is happening there?
So I would turn to another study that was done to complement that was done by Stan
Yes.
and that Dr. Carl James commented on. And that showed that the longer Black people are in the system,
Yes.
the education system, like, third generation by generation,
Yes.
the worse off they're doing in our education system. So that's not to say that we should all just say to heck with education,
Yes.
but it also shows that there are some serious issues with the education system that
Yeah.
need to be fixed. So a first generation student, the example that Dr. James gives, will come to Canada and will
Go hard at it. Go hard.
yes,
Yes.
yes. But at the same time, they haven't dealt with like 2 generations of racism within the classroom and within the schools. So it's also how the teachers react and respond to the 2 different Black students, because they could both be Black. But there's something that needs to be done around our education system. Who are the teachers? Do they reflect the students, right? Tana Turner did a report that looks at Black students being suspended at a higher rate, even though they make a lower percentage. Black students, with Dr. James, Black students being streamed to lower levels when they want to go into higher academic levels, not lower, higher, but streamed into non-academic pathways, let's say, right? And that almost happened to me. It wasn't for my mom intervening. Right?
So that's the channeling. That's a channeling then. So you're saying that is a system encompassed in anti-Black racism of channeling students towards lower level instead of enabling them to matriculate according to their own potentials.
Right, exactly. And the Black students who are there, they need to see, Black teachers who look like them, Black principals who look like them, and also the parents need to be welcome, because sometimes school administrators would say, oh, the parents are not involved, or the parents are not this. But I've worked with Black mothers, and there have been instances where if they go in, they're not welcome in the office, or they're not, if they advocate for their child, they're kind of blacklisted from going back in again, right?
Okay.
Yeah, so the students that I worked with in the Peel We Rise Together report said the number one advocate for them,
Yes.
overwhelmingly, was their mother. And for other students, it might be your guidance counselor, your teacher, your principal, your active after school extracurricular person. So we really have a lot that we have done and that we continue to do.
Yes.
But we also need, as you say, solutions. We need those system-wide solutions.
Yes.
And that's where I would go at it at. We need good, fully funded public education institutions which have racial lens clearly written into policy, not just racism on the side,
Yes.
but racism as it relates to education, health, housing, childcare. How do all of these things kind of intersect?
Yes.
So voting is important, right? Who we
Absolutely.
vote for is important.
And just before you veer off in that direction, because that's a bigger conversation we're coming to, just want to interject something here that a fellow colleague of yours said. I know you've had the panel discussion addressing anti-black racism in the school system. Dr. ABC, Mr. Andrew Campbell, is a phenomenal thinker and a phenomenal, I tell you, person here in in Toronto, in and around Toronto. But he said something interesting. Just this morning on his live, I tuned in. He said sometimes, especially and was pointing towards his whiter friends, because he's a teacher also, is that sometimes you think you can't do, but you actually have the power to do it. And he pointed to an instance in which one of his friends, well, wasn't a friend at the time, but then he was somewhere giving a speech, and the lady came up to him and said, "How do I get you in my school?" And she was a mere teacher, but she worked with her school administration, and he made it a reality. He also pointed to something else, said it starts from the reading books that we consume as students. It starts from the Cinderella stories and the Prince Charming stories, where the black student or the black child is not just the helper, is not just the background, the support for the man, but is seen as the main character.
Yes, yes. And that's something that a lot of Black folks, I'm really glad Dr. ABC spoke about that, because that's something that a lot of Black folks have been advocating for to happen in schools. And it's not to say that some of this hasn't happened, but I'm glad Dr. ABC said, yes, it's in the teacher's power to say, no, I'm not using this book. Yes, I'm using this book instead. And to be very intentional about what the students and the children consume in terms of their learning material, also at home. Like, I have younger sisters, and I take care of them sometimes, and I've been super intentional about the books that are here.
Yes.
I also work in like community programs, one out of Delta, and running into the library of Black Christian House, which is Rosa Parks, Rosa Parks, Rosa Parks, Rosa Parks, Rosa Parks. So I filed a complaint, and I said, we need Canadian history in this library. You need to do better, right?
Absolutely.
They tried to pin it on who to resolve. However, if you have a racial justice lens that's not just falling on Black people, but for everyone to take full responsibility and accountability,
Yes.
you can really make change, right, at multiple levels.
Absolutely, and fantastic. So now let's get to voting, because that's where the other part is. They say that if you want to make the change, you have to be a part of the change. For one, if you want to see the end of police brutality, become an officer. Inform your fellow colleagues as to how to approach situations. Not all black men are gangsters. How do you approach? And then the other part that comes in is a fear, the fear factor that comes in. You know, the police saying that, oh, approaching a black person is much different than approaching a white person. There's a fear factor there. So helping to dismantle that fear factor. If you want to change the laws, then get into the positions in which laws are made. So run for city council, run for a member of parliament. Do whatever is necessary to get you at that table, to get you a seat at that table.
Right, right. And that's something that, like, in my community work, I realized that there's only so much you can do as a not-for-profit, as a community organizer, and that really motivated me to begin political organizing and political advocacy. So the party that I identify with is the NDP, because I believe in good public systems, healthcare systems, and I really believe that the systems that were cut and the funding cuts that have happened,
Yes.
nothing has been done about it for 15 plus years. And now we're starting to see the trickle down effect on our Black communities, right? Because where do they cut first? Who do they cut from first? So I would say, like, when you run, think about, look into who, or when you support someone, who are you supporting and how are they going to uplift this community, and run too, right? Like, we, MPP Laura May Lindo is there now. Dr. Jill Andrew is there now. You have, now there's a Black caucus, which there wasn't before. So for myself personally, I'm now holding the position of vice president of the Ontario NDP. That doesn't mean that I'm always comfortable with everything that is done, right? So, for example, this morning we passed a motion to have anti-Black racism training at all of our, or at some of our upcoming meetings for all of the executives, you know, the staff and this and that. So change from within can happen, but you can't sit on your hands and you can't be comfortable and you can't be happy with the position or happy with, because we can't, right?
We have
Black
to get
people, as you
active.
said, we're
We have to
tired,
get
right?
active.
Yes, yeah. So really being critical about who comes around and when they come around and that sort of thing, I think is very important, because seeing some beautiful things coming up in the United States in terms of representation, like who are the representatives, and these are people who've done on the ground work for years, right? So I commend them for running and for taking that very, very seriously as well.
Absolutely. And for those, just a quick interjection here, for those who think that what happens in the US doesn't affect what happens in Canada, we literally share a border. And the last time we saw when there were increased tensions between the racial group, there was mass amount of immigrations and rush to the border, or Canadian border, seeking asylum here in Canada. So the interests are not only economically tied, but we're socially tied. And hence we have to, and it's not even just about the US, and it's not even just about Canada, it's about the linkage all Black persons have around the world. I know we're currently in the midst of the United Nations decade for persons of African descent. And what that means is there's a greater call for the diaspora, that means Blacks in Canada, the US, the Caribbean, in Europe, to really come together to start building up or legacy in terms of the infrastructures, our own stories, our economy, really start building on that and getting active in that building process, not just talking, not just making the posts on Facebook, not just protesting, but really doing what it takes. When it's election time, show up, vote for who you want to lead. Where if you don't see an eligible candidate and you can pull support from your own constituency that you're situated in, then try your hand at leadership, right? Be the voice at the table to change things. And that's not just an appeal for the viewers here on the show today, but it's for our viewers to spread the message, because there are vital messages being taken away from today's discussion. For one, in your recommendations, it's really tapping into our education system. And it's not just education system in terms of going to school, but it's also responsibility for parents at home to really sit their children down and explain certain things to them at different stages of their lives. For one, at a younger age, see yourself as a princess that you see on TV, right? And then as your child grows, start explaining to them some of the things that will happen. I heard something that I consider to be fantastic. There was an explanation. If you get stopped by the police, and that's going back to police brutality, if you get stopped by the police, remain calm. Don't escalate the situation beyond what it is before, remain calm, try to answer the questions. But we've seen even then, it doesn't always translate to a peaceful resolution. And that's where your recommendations come into play. And I want you to just give us your final encapsulating thoughts on how do we really address anti-Black racism in our society as we move into the future. As I said, we can't afford to exit this decade, and for those who have been tuned in on the show in last week, weeks before, exit this decade without addressing issues like this.
Yes, yeah. So I would say it takes a collaborative approach. I would say that white folks need to step in and to also have those serious conversations within their communities as well, calling out anti-Black racism, but also supporting it by action, right? So a specific example I have is that white people are usually, work, you know that white people are usually the ones to want to run, right, for politics. But creating the space so that it's not just white people at the table. So you have those enriched experiences from everyone, right, based on where they're coming from too. So not only speaking out, but stepping aside sometimes as well and allowing for Black people to also take up those leadership positions too.
Absolutely.
The other piece I would say is education, education within the home, like you said, and education within the schools, but also supporting some of the actions that are taking place by Black community members, Black parents, and just supporting each other as a community. You know, if someone wants to go in and they want to change policy at the school board level, you know, just reaching out to folks who would be able to channel those things, right? And having those clear conversations and being just very, very open about it. And finally, I would say, you know, it's tough for me to wrap up into the solutions.
Absolutely.
Because there's so much problems. But I would say those are the people who are fighting and leading the fight. We might not agree with everything everyone does or the tactics or the strategies that they take, but not getting lost in just those side commentary, because that's what kind of pushes away from that change, right?
Absolutely. So getting the right information.
Exactly. Getting the right information, supporting our communities, supporting the protests as well, I would say very, very much, very important. Protests are the reasons we have 8-hour workdays, we have weekends, we have mat leave, we have some racial justice, we have education. Protest, yes, protest, but protest isn't the only thing. So also protests, you know, like now we have the Confronting Anti-Black Racism Unit at the City of Toronto. That wouldn't have happened if people weren't going to City Hall in droves and protesting, and Black Lives Matter leading the charge in those conversations, right? So really in full support of those things, but also creating new outlets as well, saying, hey, you know, I want to address this piece around stories, right? There are groups that are out there that have like little like Black libraries, right? So figuring out who are the businesses supporting them, Black business, who are the Black businesses supporting them as well, right? So kind of doing our research, sharing the information, sharing correct and accurate information too, because a lot of misinformation gets circulated in all communities. Being able to be very critical of that as well. But I am hopeful. Even though I've been very ticked off lately, I am very, very hopeful. And I do think that people are being put to have these conversations, and I hope they're not just conversations. I hope they're actually action and just doing work, small acts and big acts, right? And on the voting piece, not just voting and running, but doing the work in between elections. What are all of the things we can do in between those 4 years, which are crucial, right? that certain affluent do. Like they demand that fence be taken down and put up this mural instead of that one. We should also have those demands, but also figure out who our political allies are within, let's say, municipal government, and work with that, bring forth motion and make change as well.
Absolutely. But we have to hold it there for today, of course. I've extended my time and my producer, I can just feel it coming. But of course, Janelle, Ms. Brady, thank you so much for joining the show here with me today. So much has been unpacked. And of course, we'll definitely have to catch up on this again. So you'll be back, right?
Thank you. Yes, definitely.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Folks can reach out to me. I might not be able to get back to everybody fairly quickly, but reach out. We're all in here as community, right? So thank you so much for having me today.
And it was our pleasure here at the U-Turn Show. But of course, we're going to just get out of here because our time is practically out. But of course, thank you so much. Whatever they may be, they have you covered. Of course, so just give them a call at 416-629-4617. You can also send them an email to info@aofimmigration.com or visit their offices. They're located at 5800 Ambler Drive in Mississauga, Ontario. And of course, I want to thank you each and every week, our U-Turn Show family, for tuning in and just keeping our company. Thank you for joining the conversation. Thank you so much for being so, sharing and liking all these weeks, years, a year and a half that we're almost been on the air. You've been wonderful company. I also want to send a huge shout out to each and every person who makes the U-Turn Show possible each and every week. But of course, as we always say here on the U-Turn Show, same time, it's 3 p.m. until 4 p.m. Same place, Gbkm FM, same host, myself, Romain Redmond. Just keep reaching, keep achieving, and keep changing the world, because together is the only way we'll make change happen. See you next week. Bye-bye.
As the world fights this coronavirus, we are standing together as a family.
My name is Kelly. I'm a fan of GBKM.
My name is Pastor Clement Omozane.
I'm Medea, your red carpet host.
I am your host, Ellen Roxon, for the show Talk That Talk here on GBKM FM.
I'm a mother and a teacher. I stand with everyone.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're listening or watching from in the world. Of course, welcome back to the U-Turn Show right here on Gbkm FM. Of course, I'm your host, Romain Redmond, and don't forget, this is where we aim to inform, empower, and also energize today's youth. If you're joining us and you were here with us last week, of course, welcome back to the show. If you're just joining us for the very first time, of course, welcome to the U-Turn Show. Don't forget, our platforms are on Facebook at Gbkm Tv, on YouTube at Gbkm TV. Also get us on our website, www.gbkm.fm. You can also get us on a TuneIn app. It's GBKM, and you can also download our app from our website. And of course, take us with you wherever you go in the world. That's right, but of course, the U-Turn Show is brought to you by the kind sponsorship of AOF Immigration Canada, who specialize in all your immigration needs, ranging from the Quebec University Program, permanent residency, student visa, whatever your immigration needs may be, they have you covered. So of course, contact AOF Immigration for your confidential and private consultation. Their phone number is 416-629-4617. You can also send them an email. It's at info@aofimmigration.com. You can also visit their offices. That's, of course, if you're in Ontario. They're located at 5800 Ambler Drive in Mississauga, Ontario. So, of course, last week on the show, we discussed the state of Ontario's education system. I was kind enough to be joined by a member of Parliament, provincial Parliament, that is, Ms. Merit Stiles, who is also the education critic with the official opposition, and so many information was unpacked in that interview as to how to make the system more equitable, as she said, going forward. But this week, of course, we take a different path. As we discuss the issue addressing anti-black racism in our society. I know for a fact that we've all been tuned in to the television, to social media, and we've seen what has been unraveling in our society. So today, we're going to get those tangible tips, those tangible tools as to how to make things like these don't reoccur in the future, as also how to make them better while we aim for that equitable and that perfect world which so many of our forefathers have told us about, have dreamt about in their prophecies. But of course, we'll take a very first break here on the U-Turned Up Show, but we'll be right back with so much more right after these messages. We'll soon be back.
As the world fights this coronavirus, we are standing together as a family.
My name is Kevin. I'm a fan of Gbkm.
My name is Pastor Clement Omozane.
I'm Medea, your red carpet host.
I am your host, Ellen Roxon, for the show Talk That Talk here on Gbkm FM.
I'm a mother and a teacher. I stand with everyone at this time.
Hi, my name is Gbkm, co-host of the King's Domain.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Goody, the host of the Chat-Up Show on GBKM.
My name is Kenny Bazwai, President and CEO, Gbkm FM and TV. We stand with all the community affected by this pandemic.
As the world
Absolutely, and welcome back to the U-Turned Up Show right here on Gbkm FM. Of course, I'm your host, Romain Redman, and you're locked into the hour from 3 p.m. until 4 p.m. And as you've seen going across on the screen down below, today's topic, one which is ever so relevant for discussion in our society, and it doesn't seem to stop going forward, having those discussions, having those pertinent and constructive discussions. It's addressing anti-black racism in our society. We spoke about it on last week's show. In relation to our education system, this week we take it to a bigger scale. And of course, in studios with me this week to help break down that conversation is, of course, our PhD candidate and the coordinator for the Center of Integrative Anti-Racism Studies at the Ontario Institute of Studies in Education, Miss Janelle Brady. But of course, Miss Brady, thank you so much for joining me on the show here today.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really, really happy to be here today with you, Romain. I really appreciate all the work that you're doing at GBKFM and for taking time to invite me on the show. Thank you.
Absolutely, it's our pleasure. You know, as a media outlet which serves the grassroots black community, we can't bypass issues like these that affect us, but of course, we can't bypass those pertinent and relevant discussion as to how to make our communities better and stronger going forward, right? I know for a fact in your studies, we're just discussing going forward your work in the education system, black parenting, and all those amazing stuff. But today we're going to stretch a net a little wider today and try to encapsulate especially our community of black men, black women, younger generation, older generation into this discussion. But before we venture into today's discussion though, I want to just share with us the work that you've been doing at the Center for Integrative Anti-Black Racism Studies.
Yes, thank you. So I've had the pleasure of working as a coordinator in a volunteer capacity and sometimes as a student researcher for the past 4 years, really.
Yes.
And the director is Dr. George Day, who is very renowned. He is a leading scholar in anti-racism studies, African indigenous knowledge, and race studies overall.
Yes.
So I've been very, very fortunate and blessed to work under his directorship.
Yeah.
And some of the work that we've looked at is how do we address anti-racism. But this center has been around since 1996, and the approach that they take, that we take as a collective, because it's really a group of a ton of volunteers,
Yes.
is we look at anti-racism, but from an integrative perspective. So when we say that, we mean, what do we mean, right?
Yes.
We mean how does race connect to gender? How does race connect to disability? How does it connect to place of birth, nationality, religion, language, sexuality, sexual orientation? How do all of these things intersect? And how do they make people have unique lived experiences, right?
Yes.
So one of the notable things that Sears has been able to do is to organize the Decolonizing Conference. And this is going back to the late 90s.
Yes.
And I worked with a wonderful a colleague, I was going to say counterpart, but a colleague, Ezi Odozor. And Ezi keeps me in check, she keeps me in line, and she's a wonderful Black woman who's done tons of work behind the scenes. So I'd just like to take a moment to acknowledge her work in recreating and reimagining better education for our Black children and Black youth. And what that might look like from a decolonizing perspective. Like, how can we really move forward based on the work that our elders have done to just carry that through, right? So the last decolonizing...
So the decolonizing angle that you look at this from, break that part down for us in your explanation, please.
Yeah, so that's a very important part because it really relates back to the project of colonization. And the project of colonization has really had an effect on Black people, Latinx people, Indigenous people. It's really ruptured our lives for generations. So in order to move forward, a lot of scholars have taken and activists have taken the approach that we need a decolonial approach. We need to decolonize these systems because although we no longer have colonial flags waving and hanging, the pieces are still there within the institution.